Hey, everybody, this is Alex Merced, and you're listening to another episode of my data podcast, which has lots of names. And you can catch on your favorite podcast catcher. So if you're not subscribed, do subscribe. Now, I'm doing this episode now that sort of like Databricks and Snowflake have made their big announcements at their conferences, and just to talk about sort of what they are, okay, and what do they actually mean. Because, every company, I mean, including every company, are going to want to make announcements and make them sound as good as they can or as amazing as they are. And at the end of the day, you're really seeing everyone kind of do what everybody else is doing. If anything, one of the biggest things I can take away from both is both companies are saying, hey, you know what, we have these partners we've built good relationships with. Let's just do what they're doing. Particularly on the semantic layer, like that was sort of like my big takeaway on both sides, where basically in Snowflake you had the release of semantic views, and then in Databricks you had the release of sort of metrics in Unity Catalog, both sort of solving sort of like that semantic layer view or that semantic layer gap, which companies, there are companies that focus on purely just providing you with a semantic layer. These are companies like AtScale, Cube, Select Star. And then there's companies like where I work, Dremio, who provide you a tool that provides you a lot of different things, one of them being a semantic layer. Okay? And again, there's the thing about a semantic layer is that what it is, it's something that kind of allows you to take certain metrics or data sets, things that basically you often refer to. So like, for example, June sales. You don't want everyone taking the sales table and then pulling out June sales, because what if someone does it slightly differently? Okay, so then what happens, you have different people making claims about June sales that are not exactly consistent. So the idea would be nice if you could consistently define June sales in one place, and then everybody else can connect their favorite tools, their Power BIs, their Tableaus, to the same place to get the same definition of the same term, same business, thus the whole word semantic. So generally, semantic layers provide you value in the regards to, one, being able to define these data sets, two, being able to do it across disparate data sources. This is where data federation kind of comes into play. This is where like Dremio is uniquely positioned as we're a query engine that federates across multiple sources. And then three, the ability to accelerate the access to those metrics. So this is where like a feature like Dremio's Reflections comes in, where we allow to create a relational cache on that. And other semantic layer vendors provide other different types of caching mechanisms. But the idea is that generally that's, when you talk about semantic layer as a product, that's what they're talking about. And some aspects of that have now entered what Snowflake and Databricks, and that's probably like the most like common thread I saw. And definitely in my conversations at the conferences, semantic layer is something that was of particular interest to a lot of people, because people have a lot of data and consistency is an issue. The other big theme is Iceberg, okay, in the sense that you had big announcements. So some of the announcements I know that happened in Snowflake is just one much more better integrations of open catalog. So that's like they're more open catalog, because in Snowflake you really have two catalogs. You have sort of the more internal proprietary Horizon catalog, which Snowflake can read and write to, but then there's like limited external functionality of reading and writing to those particular Iceberg tables with Horizon catalog. Then there is Open Catalog, which is the Apache Polaris based catalog, which is just a open source catalog, so anyone can connect to it, anyone can read and write to it. It's more open. Same thing with Dremio Catalog, which is also Apache Polaris based. You also had the announcement of OpenFlow. So essentially, Snowflake had purchased Datavolo, which was a company that was built around a project called Apache NiFi, which is essentially a data movement tool to move data from point A to point B. And from that, they've built OpenFlow, which is just essentially a built-in ingestion tool inside of Snowflake. So this is more like a shot across of companies like a Fivetran or Matillion. And essentially what this does is it allows you to move data into Snowflake as Snowflake native tables or as Iceberg tables. So, a solution for Iceberg ingestion theoretically. So you have a couple, things like that. So on the Snowflake side, those were some of the announcements that stuck out in my mind. Also a bunch of announcements regarding their specific AI platforms and AI development. So in this case, Snowflake, enhancements to Cortex and Databricks, just announcements to their platform in general, particularly like Mosaic. Now, on the Databricks side, as far as Iceberg goes, the bigger actual announcements of things you can do and use now is, and actually an announcement that I was actually pretty excited about, is the ability to read and write tables to Unity Iceberg tables specifically into Unity Catalog. Okay, this is good. Okay, because basically you should be able to read and write Iceberg tables. So again, let me just caveat this, is that basically before this announcement, you could not write Iceberg tables to Unity Catalog. What you could do is you could write Delta tables to Unity Catalog. And again, these are two different metadata formats. So while the Parquet files may be theoretically the same, the way you describe what's in those Parquet files for efficient query planning is different. Okay? It's kind of like, I made this post on LinkedIn where I talk about dates. So most of the world does day, month, year. So so basically my birthday would be 3685. Okay, while in the US we generally do month, day, year, so it would be more like 6/30/85. Now at the end of the day, they're referring to the same day. In the same way, Delta metadata and Iceberg metadata are referring to the same Parquet files. They're just different ways of referring to it that some people understand better than others. Okay. And then, depending on sort of how you expect the data, that label to be presented to you, it's going to affect on whether you understand it. Okay. So that is the thing there. So there are two different metadata formats that allow people to understand where the data is and to efficiently look at it. But Unity was always meant for built for Delta Lake, and then you would use a feature called Uniform, which would create a Iceberg version of the metadata, but it would not let you write to that for good reason. If you're writing to if you have two writes, both writing to two different metadata formats, you can end up having incomplete and inconsistent histories of changes to the table, which would not be good. But you didn't have the ability to have native Iceberg tables in Unity. You couldn't separately just have Iceberg tables be Iceberg tables. So with this update to Unity, that is now a thing. So you get all the other benefits of Unity, and plus you can have Iceberg tables in there. One of the odder announcements is, and I think a lot of companies did this, where they made a big announcement, a hullabaloo of Iceberg v3. Now, Iceberg v3 isn't a new Databricks feature. Let me make this very clear. All v3 is a new version of the Iceberg spec that just recently got approved. So just recently, everyone over there in the Apache Iceberg PMC, okay, project management committee, they all kind of agreed, yes, this new version of spec is cool. Now it's off to the races for everyone to build their support for the new version of the spec. Okay, you're probably going to be looking at a year before really the majority of Iceberg tools can support v3. So even though all these cool features have now been approved, such as row-level lineage, support for the variant type, deletion vectors, these are all cool things. But again, you're looking at a year before all tools. And the problem is, if you support v3 before that, if you start, whoever kind of provides the initial v3 support, well, then you're kind of stuck with your tools there, because again, you don't really want to have v3 tables until sort of the broader ecosystem has added v3 support. So v2 is still the standard for reading and writing Iceberg tables for the foreseeable future. Okay, so yes, some really cool features are on the way. There's already some really cool and exciting discussions about things like single file commits for v4 of Iceberg. So a lot of really cool stuff down the Iceberg way. And again, the girth of Iceberg investments, of Iceberg announcements in the Databricks world and Snowflake world just kind of reaffirm how big a deal more how much Iceberg has become the standard. Okay, in the sense that everyone's kind of defaulting to Iceberg. And if you've the whys and the hows, you can listen to my previous episodes to really kind of get all that. Okay. But that's, to me, the bigger takeaway. Now, part of the announcements are trying to say okay, hey, look, they're unifying. This is more FUD than anything, in the sense of trying to say, hey, they're not the same thing. They never will be the same thing. I've done another episode where I talk about why they will never merge. They'll never become the same thing. They'll become closer. Okay, or there's areas where both projects can work together because they both use the same primitive as Parquet. And most of the areas are, so when they say like, oh, we've unified the data layer, like they were always both using Parquet. They're just, now there's better collaboration in enhancing Parquet, which enhances both formats. Okay, the only true way that they've gotten somewhat closer together is in the usage of what's called a deletion vector, which is just a better way to express sort of deltas. Okay, so and when it came to the world of doing like merge on read type transactions, the deletion vectors were the last entry in the race. Okay, Hoodie was first with sort of a merge on read feature, then it was Iceberg, then it was Delta Lake with the deletion vectors. Okay, and generally, the later you get in the race, the more you can learn from everyone else's mistakes and come up with some improvements. So deletion vectors were neat. Okay, in the sense of being able to compactly track these sort of deltas, in the sense of tracking, hey, these are the files that changed and what changed in them, so that I don't have to rewrite the whole file, versus equality and position deletes in Iceberg v2. Now, right now, for the foreseeable future, Iceberg v2 is still the standard, which means position and equality deletes aren't going anywhere anytime soon. But once you have v3 tables, those will be eliminated. So instead of having to write several additional position and equality delete files, you'll just have deletion vectors tracked as a binary blob in a Puffin file. But that's still not exactly how, maybe the binary encoding may be very similar, but Delta doesn't use Puffin files. It's still, again, not the exact same thing. To the extent that this unifies the formats, what it does do, it just makes it where Databricks, to build Iceberg functionality, won't have to write as much code, because some certain pieces of Iceberg are now a little bit more similar to what they are used to working with. It's the metadata structures, the fundamental way snapshot isolation is handled is fundamentally different. Very, very different, and there's no reason why they'll ever sort of like completely overlap. Okay, again, you have in Delta Lake, you have sort of like this incremental sort of snapshot where basically each JSON log is sort of like, hey, these are the features that were added and subtracted. So basically, it's more like each log represents sort of a change, while in Iceberg, each snapshot's completely isolated from another. So in each snapshot, you have a complete list of, hey, this is what's included in this snapshot. That doesn't require you to read the previous snapshots. Okay, I'm not gonna get into whether one's better or the other. They're just different. They're fundamentally different. So again, they can borrow from each other around the edges, borrow good ideas from each other, which I totally encourage. But again, they'll never become the same thing, because it would break a lot of things. Okay, so any claims that these things are the same thing or going to be the same thing are just wishful thinking. Okay, again, it's not a bad thing to have multiple formats. The fundamental reasons why each format exists currently hasn't changed. Again, like Hoodie solves hey, I really want to stream at sub-second latency into my lakehouse. And like, if that's a must, then, Hoodie does a thing. If you're looking for specifically like Databricks integrations, and Delta Lake has a thing. But if you're looking for just your general use case, like, hey, I need tables to satisfy many different use cases that has the highest amount of interoperability with the tooling in the market, Iceberg is going to be the standard. It's what everyone's just kind of built on. And it works pretty well for most use cases, and is very flexible and doesn't require you to buy into any particular ecosystem to use. So that's just sort of the state of things. For the other announcements that I heard, there wasn't anything else that really kind of jumped out at me. Like, there was stuff like, I think they mentioned like the Databricks agent. So it's just basically a agent that helps you work with the Databricks platform. This is really kind of table stakes at this point. Like, for example, what most people are doing are just creating MCP servers. Like Dremio created our MCP server that gives you the same functionality as being able to leverage an LLM to admin your platform and to ask questions of your data platform. And I imagine that's sort of like I just think MCP is just going to be the way things are the way everyone's going to just basically make everything LLMable It's just it requires a lot less. It's a lot lower barrier to entry. It's a lot more flexible because I can take my preferred client. Like I just literally built a MCP client this morning just because I'm on Linux and Claude 2 is not something I can. Claude desktop is not something I can install on Linux, so I created like a little LangChain client that I can work with any MCP server. I can just quickly throw in some MCP servers and work with different tooling without necessarily having to have a completely different interface. I don't have to log into a particular place. I just connect MCP servers to my little tool, and I get the ability to work with different platforms directly from a chat kind of interface. That's cool. Um, but yeah, so overall, honestly, I'm underwhelmed in general with the broadness of the announcements from both. At the end of the day, again, if you're working in Iceberg, just accept that you should write to V2. So again, even if someone does release V3 reading and writing in the near term, I would wait till it's broadly adopted, so that way all the kinks are worked out. So in this case, you really should be focusing on doing the best work you can with with V2 tables at the moment. And far as like a first class Iceberg experience, that's still generally going to be Dremio's ball game. We're the only platform where basically it's not like, hey, we have our thing and there's also Iceberg tables. It's the platform where Iceberg tables are the thing. It's sort of the way Iceberg tables are tables, and we manage that experience from beginning to end. So if you're not as familiar with Dremio, please do check out my tutorials and check out my videos and follow me on LinkedIn and all that stuff. I'll talk more about it there. But hopefully you guys have a better idea of sort of like the announcements. Again, cool stuff. So if you're using Databricks, you're using Snowflake, you've gotten some cool new features as you usually would at this time every year. Do I find anything that kind of changes in the industry as fundamentally as like last year when you had like the Tabular and Polaris announcements, like that were sort of earth shattering? Not as much. Now I think really this year at the end, like basically the focus right now is just like the race to build sort of the best sort of complete lakehouse experience. So at the end of the day, like you shouldn't. The point of a lakehouse isn't to just have one vendor that does everything and do everything with one vendor. You're trying to avoid the lock-in, but you still probably want someone who provides you a good end-to-end experience in your lakehouse, or as close to it as possible, like the best wrapper around your data lake to provide the most data warehouse like experience around your data lake. Again, if you haven't tried Dremio, I think Dremio has a pretty unique story here. But in general, that's what everyone's doing. Everyone's trying to create the platform that's going to provide the best data warehouse like wrapper around your data lake. And then the question is just sort of like, how open is that wrapper? How much does that wrapper cost? How easy to use is that wrapper? How performant is that wrapper? All these kinds of questions. And to me, it's just now everyone's just trying to iterate on that. And eventually, your data lake houses become your data warehouses. Your data lakes just become the storage. And that's just, you're just shifting what you've always experienced into a slightly better arrangement, far as a slightly better and more flexible arrangement. So with that, I'll leave it at that as my thoughts. I'll see y'all later. Have a great day and enjoy.